Hello everyone, welcome back to Rewired with your host Khadija Farosh. For those of you just joining us, this podcast is all about differentiating between fact and fiction through exploring our teenage minds and psychology. Now I don't want to spoil the rest of the episode, so I want you all to sit back, relax, and enjoy. Have you ever taken a personality test that has told you that you're a logistician or a visionary, an architect or an advocate? All of these bundled letters, INFJ, INTP, ESTJ and all. You know, the ones where you suddenly feel like your whole life starts to make sense, where you think, wow, this is so me. But just without this trait and that characteristic, and I'm not like this TV show character or that celebrity. Well, in today's episode, we're diving into one of the most popular personality tests, the Myers-Briggs MBTI test, and we're going to be debunking some of the biggest myths about personality itself. But before we get started, this episode is the second part of the Rewired personality psychology segment, so I suggest that you take a listen to the episode right before this one, where I give some more context on what personality actually is, and the Big Five model. This will definitely help you understand the concepts that will be discussed in today's episode. So let's start with the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or the MBTI test. You've probably seen it all over Instagram or TikTok. It's 16 types like ENFP, ISTJ, and everything in between. Essentially, the Myers-Briggs splits personality into 4 key dimensions. Each dimension is a pair of opposites, and you get placed on one side or the other. The first is I and E, introversion versus extroversion. S and N, sensing versus intuition. T and F, thinking versus feeling. And J and P, judging versus perceiving. So let's break it down in terms of focus and characteristics. So looking at introversion versus extroversion, the focus of those who are extroverted is that they're more oriented towards the external world. They gain more energy from interacting with people and engaging in outside activities, similar to the extroversion trait of the Big Five that we talked about in the last episode. They gain energy. People who classify more under the extroversion trait tend to be more outgoing and sociable, and they enjoy group activities and group discussions. They tend to act first and reflect later, which makes them more impulsive, and they're more comfortable in busier environments. The opposite of this is introversion. The focus of introverts is that they're more oriented towards the internal world. They gain their energy from more solitary activities, from observation, and from reflection. People who classify under the I introversion trait tend to be more reserved and reflective. They prefer deep one-on-one interactions instead of group discussions. They think more before acting, so they're less impulsive and their actions are more predetermined. And they prefer more calm and quiet environments. To give an example, an extroverted person might feel rejuvenated after attending a lively event or a party, while an introverted individual might prefer a more quiet evening with a close friend or a film, a book, a hobby, anything like that. Next, we have S and N, sensing versus intuition. Sensing describes people who prefer concrete information gathered through the 5 senses, so hearing, smelling, seeing, touching, and tasting. A sensing person will look at the details of a situation and they'll use their senses to examine the evidence that they have. They tend to be more detail-oriented and practical, and they value fact and real-world applications over imagination. They live more in the present moment, and they prefer established method and routine. The opposite of this is intuition. Intuition highlights people who prefer abstract information, and they look at the bigger picture. They'll focus less on evidence and their senses, but more on patterns that the situation might fall into, or the future possibilities that the information might present. They tend to be more imaginative and, of course, future-oriented. They value ideas, possibilities, and innovation, things that are not already put in place. They enjoy exploring patterns and meanings, and they're more comfortable with ambiguity. An example of the two could be, say, when assembling furniture. A sensing individual might meticulously follow a step-by-step instruction manual, but an intuitive person might glance at the overall diagram and intuitively understand how the pieces fit together to eventually wing it. Third, we have T and F, which is thinking versus feeling. Thinking individuals make decisions based on logic and objective criteria. They're more rational and they prefer to weigh decisions by logically considering all the options available and selecting the most reasonable one based on the information provided. They're more analytical and objective rather than emotional, and they value fairness and justice. Of course, this mainly impacts decision making and not overall behavior. Feeling describes people who make decisions based on personal values and relationships, so impacts on others as well. People with the feeling trait follow their hearts and emotions, sometimes without even realizing it. They may show it to different degrees and in different ways, but however they do it, they tend to be more naturally empathetic, as per the MBTI criteria. Their characteristics typically include valuing harmony and relationships. They may prioritize emotion over objective criteria, and they focus more on people and collaboration. An example of this could be in, say, a workplace scenario. A thinking individual might prioritize efficiency and effectiveness, whereas a feeling person might consider the morale and overall well-being of the team. Finally, we have J and P, which is judging versus perceiving. Judging individuals tend to have a lifestyle preference of structure, organization, and planned approaches. They prefer to consider their options ahead of time, and personality types with this trait prefer clarity and closure, sticking with plans rather than going with the flow. They tend to feel most comfortable when the course ahead is well marked, and they would rather come up with 5 backup plans than wing it or go with the flow. They tend to be more organized and decisive, they prefer schedules and deadlines, and they seek closure and enjoy completing activities. This gives them more motivation, which means they are more likely to finish activities after starting them. They also may find last-minute changes very disruptive, as this messes with schedules and pre-planned activities. The opposite of this is perceiving, and individuals with this trait prefer flexibility, spontaneity, and open-ended approaches. They prefer being open and responsive to different feedback or change, and they plan minimally and work with challenges as they come. So they tend to be more adaptable and they're more open-minded. They like to keep their options open and don't like to follow a narrow path. And they enjoy starting new projects, but they may struggle with completion due to their high ambition as well as their spontaneity and impulsivity. They're more comfortable with changing plans and they're free to improvise. They're good with improvisation. This one's pretty simple to come up with an example for. For instance, when planning a vacation, a judging individual might create a detailed itinerary with booked accommodations and activities, while the perceiving person might prefer to go with the flow and make spontaneous decisions along the way. When you put all 4 of these characteristics together, you get a personality type like INFP or ESTJ, and each of these types comes with a title or a description, like the adventurer, the commander, the mediator. Now that we have the basis of this test down, let's look at why people love it so much. The MBTI is popular because it's easy to understand and it's relatable. The truth is, people love hearing about themselves, and people love labels. It's easy self-reflection that requires less introspection, less looking inwards, but instead filling in a fun questionnaire that'll give you a unique title and match you to a few celebrities and fictional characters. But the truth is, while the MBTI is fun, it's not very scientific or accurate. Unlike the big 5 traits that we talked about last time, MBTI isn't based on decades of research, and people often get different results when they do take the test again. It has not been based in scientific theory, nor has it been tested in any scientific means. And one major limitation of this test is how it forces you into one side of a dimension, like you're either an introvert or an extrovert, I or E. But in reality, most of us are somewhere in between. Categorizing individuals into binary opposites may not capture the complexity and the nuance of human personality. Human traits often exist on a spectrum, and these classifications can lead to the oversimplification of a person's characteristics. Additionally, unlike the Big 5 test, the MBTI does not predict job performance, success, for future personal happiness, etc. accurately. It focuses on preferences rather than competencies or emotional well-being, which limits its applicability in these areas. Finally, the MBTI does not account for certain personality traits, such as, say, emotional stability or neuroticism, which are considered to be significant in other personality models like the Big 5. This omission of leaving out these traits can result in an incomplete understanding of an individual's overall personality. Now that we've talked about the MBTI, let's bust some of the biggest myths about personality that you might have seen across social media. You guys sent in some suggestions through my Instagram, and I've also done some digging to find some common ones and used some that I've already come across online myself. The first one I find to be very significant and very commonly seen, is that introverts are shy. The truth about this myth is that introverts aren't necessarily shy, they just recharge by spending time alone, while extroverts gain energy from being around people. Shyness is more so about social anxiety and social behavior, while introversion is about where people get their energy from. Think about your friend who might love public speaking but needs a quiet evening afterwards. That's an introvert who's confident, not shy. This myth can be frustrating for introverts who are actually quite outgoing in the right settings. Many famous figures like Albert Einstein and Bill Gates are or were introverts, yet they are far from shy. The second myth is that personality never changes. I actually discussed this in our last episode, but for those who didn't hear it, psychologists have found that personality is flexible over time. Traits like conscientiousness, openness, emotional stability, things like that often shift as people grow and adapt to life experiences. Think about yourself 5 years ago. Were you more impulsive, less confident, or different in social settings? Chances are you probably grew in ways that reflect personality change. Research in personality psychology suggests that major life events like moving to a new city, starting a new job, experiencing a difficulty can shape our traits. So while core tendencies may remain, our personalities are far from rigid or fixed. The third myth is that personality tests define you. These tests, like the MBTI and the Enneagram, are meant for self-reflection, not for boxing you into a rigid category. No test can fully capture the complexity of human personality. Let's say a test labels you as logical. That doesn't mean that you can't be deeply empathetic. People are multidimensional, and no test can account for all aspects of who you are. Most personality tests rely on self-reporting as well, which means that results can change depending on your mood, your stress level, or even how much caffeine you've had that day. These tests are used as tools and not rules. I like to think that the questions that are given when you're solving the actual questionnaires can promote more self-reflection than the result that it gives you in the end. The fourth and final myth that I'll be discussing is that extroverts are happier, smarter, more trustworthy, etc. than introverts. Happiness or intelligence, etc. aren't about how outgoing or reserved you are. It's about fulfillment in life. Extroverts may enjoy social events, while introverts might feel happiest spending time with close friends. One isn't better than the other. Studies show that happiness is linked to meaning and well-being, not personality type itself. So whether you thrive in crowds or in solitude, what matters is that your lifestyle fits your natural energy. I believe extroverts, by society standards, come across as more intelligent than introverts because of how we've become wired as individuals. Extroverts represent more bold characteristics like being outgoing, loud, or prone to speaking up, but this is simply not true. And the largest current meta-analyses in social sciences and neuroscience have found little to no correlations between overall extroversion and intelligence. So even though extroverts might be more outgoing or thrive in social settings, that doesn't mean that they're more competent, smarter, happier, trustworthy than introverts, and vice versa. Today we talked about the Myers-Briggs test, why it's fun but flawed, and debunked some common personality myths. Remember, you're not defined by a test, and your characteristics and traits are flexible. If you're not the most organized, you can work on building habits. If you feel shy, you can practice speaking up. Personality is a starting point, but you can decide how you want to grow from there.